the UFC is doing this. Dana is 100% right. Like, it's just absolutely insane to try to fix fights if you're a promoter. I mean, you're done. You're finished. Not only are you going to jail, your business is done, right?
FBI has just arrested Dana White, and this UFC gambling scandal is detonating every lie the fight world has been hiding for years. The man who built the UFC empire is now at the center of a federal firestorm that's shaking the entire sport to its knees.
Because I don't give a fuck about you. Do your thing. Leave me alone.
What the FBI uncovered behind this arrest is so shocking that it could change the future of MMA forever.
You know, it is what it is. There's an investigation going on, and see how it plays out.
The man who turned the UFC from a fringe cage fighting circus into a global empire was suddenly being walked out by federal agents as if he was the undercard criminal on a Vegas police blotter.
There's no proof that he's done this yet, but I can tell you this, it doesn't look good. It definitely doesn't look good.
How does the most powerful man in combat sports go from running the entire show to becoming the centerpiece of a federal gambling firestorm? But the truth hit fast. This wasn't sudden. This thing had been building like a volcano. Pressure, heat, warning signs, and everyone pretended it was just smoke. It wasn't. It was a full-blown eruption. For months, sketchy betting patterns were swirling around the UFC. Fights nobody cared about suddenly had suspicious betting spikes. Fighters whispered about being approached. Managers dodged questions, and every time something smelled off, there was always a convenient denial or a convenient explanation. But all those little red flags eventually started pointing to the same place, straight up the UFC chain of command.
They spoke to Isaac once the questionable and exaggerated gambling activity was coming out before the fight. Spoke to Isaac, spoke to his team. He said he spoke to his lawyer as well. Isaac assured them that nothing nefarious was going on.
And the whole disaster really ignited with one fight, Isaac Delgarian. On the surface, just another hardworking prospect stepping into the cage. But behind the scenes, sportsbooks were exploding, massive bets dumping into one absurdly specific outcome before the fighters even touched gloves. Money coming in like someone already had the script.
We approached him before the fight, he and his lawyer, and they denied that anything, from everything. Are you hurt? Are you injured in any way? Do you owe people money? Have you been asked to do anything, illegal? We asked them all the questions, and everything was absolutely not. Hell no.
The UFC pulled Delgarian aside for questioning, and he didn't walk in alone. He brought a lawyer. A fighter walking into a pre-fight meeting with a lawyer is like bringing a fire extinguisher to a candlelight dinner. It screams something's wrong. Delgarian denied it all. Threats, injuries, debt, bribes, everything. He said he was good to go, ready to finish the guy. And then the fight happened and ended in the first round. This was the kind of fast that makes regulators blink twice, check the replay, and go.
Distance themselves from it, and I think tried to position, whether true or not, the UFC as the ones who initiated the fire alarm to the FBI.
And that's where things get suspicious for Dana White. According to him, he walked out of the arena and immediately called the FBI. A promoter calling federal agents after a fight is not normal behavior.
You distance yourself from this, right? Where the UFC is not involved in this. You explain what happened, which is that this was flagged. You follow the protocol. You ask the fighter assures you nothing's going to happen. And then the fight happens and it looks fishy. And the first thing Dana says that he did is called the FBI.
And the FBI didn't see this as an isolated case. They saw a pattern that smelled just like the James Krause scandal from the year before. The biggest betting mess in UFC history. The one the UFC pretended was handled, even though anybody paying attention knew the stink never went away.
Knowledge that there are people coming out, fighters coming out saying, I've been approached. We talked about Vanessa Demopoulos. We talked about Vince Morales, Lando, even Edgar Chavez posting on social media. And we could get to that in a moment.
As investigators dug deeper, fighters started talking, not through the UFC management, but just blurting it out. Publicly because they didn't know what else to do. Vanessa Demopoulos claimed she'd been approached. Vince Morales admitted the same. Lando Venata mentioned it too. Fighters said they'd been offered money to throw fights, to stall fights, to fake injuries, to drag matches into specific rounds. All the classic gambling manipulation tactics.
Well, what's the UFC going to do? We let these guys know not to bet on fights. Do you know what the outcome of this is? Like, if I penalize them, you get cut. They're gonna go to fucking federal prison.
Then something bizarre happened. Every single one of them retracted their statements within hours. Not days or weeks, but hours. It looked like someone behind the scenes pressed a big red button and every statement's vanished. And fans noticed the pattern immediately. All these fighters were connected to the same management group, Iridium, run by Jason House, a group heavily tied into James Krause and his old circle. At that point, the situation stopped looking like a few shady gamblers poking around the edges. It looked like a network, with the same coaches, same managers, same fighters, same gyms, all tied together like a web nobody wanted to acknowledge.
Is that the standard operating procedure, right? Is the standard operating procedure to go to the fighter themselves?
And the UFC was right in the middle of it. Whether Dana personally knew everything or not didn't matter anymore. All of this operated inside UFC territory, inside the gyms UFC signed fighters from, inside the management systems UFC worked with, and inside the events UFC supervised. The UFC didn't pull the Delgarian fight. They let it happen even after suspicious betting activity was reported. UFC staff interrogated Delgarian instead of an independent regulator. The organization acted like it could police itself, and that arrogance became Exhibit A for federal investigators.
This is exactly what you need to be doing if you're Dana White. We are not involved in this, and we are cooperating with the FBI in the investigation.
And in the middle of all this mess, Dana White tried to distance himself like the drama was happening 3 planets away. He stepped forward with the presidential statement, "We're not involved. We followed protocol. We called the FBI." Cool, sounds clean, but the public wasn't buying the corporate version of events. The big obvious question hung in the air. If the UFC thought something was wrong, why didn't they pull the fight?
And he's like, why didn't you tell us? Like, when you got approached, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell the authorities, even more so than us? Why didn't you run?
Dana also said fighters should have come straight to him or the FBI the second someone tried bribing them, as if the fight world is some perfect workplace with HR meetings and mentorship programs. Fighters are broke. Fighters are desperate. Fighters are surrounded by shady characters because that's the nature of combat sports. Expecting them to immediately rat out a gambling offer is cute, but disconnected from reality.
But I think from Dana's point of view, like, he's trying to protect the legitimacy of the sport. I think you guys did a great job of kind of breaking down how damaging this could be to the UFC, to MMA as a whole, if this is as bad as some people are speculating it is to be.
And while Dana was trying to patch the leaks in public, the FBI had already kicked the door open. They came with files, and they came with questions. The agents started digging into betting spikes, cross-checking fighter statements with financial patterns, chasing down the managerial connections, and tracing the fingerprints of the old Krause network. They weren't looking at one fight anymore. They were looking at the entire ecosystem. Whispers leaked that hundreds of fights were being reviewed in the background, and Dana's attempt to portray the UFC as the hero, the organization that reported everything first, completely backfired. Because the second investigators saw how many red flags existed before the Delgarian fight, the question became brutal. If the UFC knew the system was filled with warning signs, why didn't they fix it earlier?
I think we need to call it like a gambling problem in the sport. It's very easy to reach out to a PFL fighter, an LFA fighter, a one championship fighter, etc., etc., etc.
Then came the biggest twist. This wasn't just a UFC problem. The entire sport was rotting. PFL had taped fights leak, and people were betting on outcomes that already happened. LFA fights had bizarre betting spikes. Random regional shows were suddenly receiving suspicious bets from overseas accounts. MMA wasn't a clean pond with one dead fish. It was an entire swamp.
This is the days where it's not as good, right? Where we have a problem in the sport of MMA, but the casual person is going to be like, the UFC has a problem.
Yeah.
But because the UFC is the face of the sport, they get all the blame. If something shady happens in MMA, fans don't say the sport is corrupt. They say Dana White is corrupt. He could be at home eating dinner, and a match-fixing scandal in another league would still trend under his name. And the worst part is that MMA has no real investigative journalism, no Pablo Torre, no Adam Schefter, no serious reporters willing to dive into a systemic corruption mess. The sport is too fragmented, too chaotic, too built on relationships and favors. Half the media works for the promotions they're supposed to investigate. The other half are YouTubers recording breakdowns in hotel rooms.
I do wonder why the FBI wouldn't have known before. Like, if the service is being alerted of suspicious gambling activity, you would think that they'd be connected. It's curious to me that it's up to the UFC the way he positions it.
So when corruption reached a level too big to ignore, there was only one entity left big enough to handle it, the FBI. That's why Dana ended up in handcuffs. Not because of one bad fight, not because of one shady manager, but because years of anomalies, confessions, retractions, connections, oversight failures, and ignored warning signs piled up into a mountain the FBI could no longer walk around.
Why is Dana White or the UFC team the one questioning Isaac Delgarian? It just feels weird, right? Like,
and Dana sealed his own fate when he publicly admitted he called the FBI after watching the fight. That line proved the UFC knew something was deeply wrong, yet still allowed the fight to take place. To federal regulators, that screams negligence, or worse, willful ignorance. And that's the moment the FBI decided the UFC wasn't just adjacent to the scandal, it was supervising it. But the arrest isn't the finale, it's the opening chapter. More fighters will talk, more managers will break, the web will unravel, and this whole scandal might become the biggest corruption case in MMA history. The real question now is terrifying. Does this bring down the UFC or reveal a side of the sport fans were never supposed to see?